Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. Hello everyone. Now I'm going to talk about assessment language learning. Okay guys, every day in a classroom, teachers measure, judge, and evaluate their student. Sometimes without even realizing it, but are they doing it right way? That is exactly what we are going to explore today in our discussion of assessment language learning. So, before we go any further, let's make sure we are all on the same page. What exactly do we mean by test, measurement, assessment, and evaluation? Okay, the first is test. Test is a method, tool, or instrument used to measure students' ability, mastery, or achievement of learning. Tests are always formal, whether written or spoken, and include formats such as multiple choice, true polls, or short answer questions. Next, measurement refers to the quantification of test result in the form of scores or figures. For example, student A gets 47 and student B gets 75. These numbers are called raw scores and carry no meaning until interpreted. Okay, next assessment. Assessment has a broader meaning than test. It includes both formal and informal assessment. Informal assessment can be as simple as a teacher observing students during group work and saying, "You're on the right track." Assessment is divided into two types. First is formative assessment, which is conducted during the learning process, for example, weekly tests, midterm exam, and summative assessment conducted at the end of the course or program. Okay, the last one is evaluation. Evaluation means giving interpretation or judgment to scores or student attainment. When a teacher decides that a student with a score of 47 fails and a student with 75 passes, that is evaluation. Evaluation can also have without measurement. For example, when a teacher simply says "excellent" in response to a correct answer. So we can conclude that assessment is the broadest concept among the four terms. It goes beyond simply giving a test or recording a score. It encompasses the entire cycle, using a test as the tool, obtaining a measurement as the result, and making an evaluation as the judgment. In other words, every time a teacher gives a quiz, observes a student, or says, "Good job," that is all part of assessment. Okay, next, assessment purposes. The first is selection. To select test takers who meet certain criteria, usually based on a quota. Selection assessment is used when a program has a limited number of spots available. For example, a university only accepts 100 students out of 300 applicants. A test is given, scores are ranked from highest to lowest, and only the top 100 are accepted. The key characteristic is that it's based on a quota. No matter how well someone scores, if they fall outside the quota, they don't make it. Okay, the second screening to filter test takers who reach the minimum passing level or MPL without a quota. Unlike selection, screening has no quota. Everyone who reaches the minimum passing level passes. For example, in a national final exam, if all 300 students in grade 12 reach the MPL, then all 300 pass. The focus is on meeting a standard, not competing for a limited number of spots. Next is placement. To group students based on ability, homogeneous or heterogeneous. This assessment is used to group students before a program begins. For example, new students are tested to determine whether they belong in a beginner, intermediate, or advanced class. The goal is to make teaching more effective by putting students with similar ability levels together, or sometimes intentionally mixing them for peer learning. And the next, prognosis to predict whether a student will succeed in a course or program. And then next, diagnosis to detect student learning problems so the teacher can provide appropriate remedies. And then research to collect data for academic purposes can be conducted at any point during a program. And the next, program evaluation to evaluate whether a course or program is effective and appropriate. And the next, accountability to report the progress of participant to a sponsor or institution. And then the last one is achievement to measure student progress by formative or final attainment summative. This is the most common type of assessment in everyday teaching. It measures how much students have learned from what has been taught. It comes in two forms: formative, conducted during the learning process to monitor progress, such as quizzes and midterm exam, and summative, conducted at the end of a course to measure final attainment, such as a final exam. The content of the test is always based on what the teacher has actually taught. And okay, the next is approaches in language assessment. Language assessment approaches help develop in line with language teaching methods. Namely is easy translation approach. Pre-scientific stage, the oldest approach, aligned with the grammar translation method, characterized by translation exercise and grammatical analysis. Scoring is subjective and no special skill is needed to construct the test. Next, discrete point approach emerged alongside the audiolingual method after World War II. Its language elements like pronunciation, grammar, vocabulary, and each language skills like listening, speaking, reading, writing is studied separately. Multiple choice format is prepared due to its objectivity and ease of statistical analysis. And then the third is integrative approach, a response to the limitation of the discrete point approach. Integrative tests combine two or more language aspects at once. Common examples include cloze test, diction, oral interviews, and easy writing. This approach was inspired by the Gestalt idea that the whole is more than the sum of its parts. The fourth is communicative testing approach, developed alongside communicative language teaching or CLT in the late 1970s, aimed to measure communicative competence, which includes 4 subcompetences. First is grammatical competence, sociolinguistic competence, discourse competence, and strategic competence. Okay, the last one is performance-based approach. An extension of communicative testing, test takers are required to perform real-world tasks and are assessed during the process. Examples include retelling a story, conducting an interview, or writing a report. This approach encompasses authentic assessment, task-based assessment, and alternative assessment. The next material is Principle of Effective Language Assessment. First is practicality, affordable cost, timely delivery, streamlined administration, educate staff, and efficient scoring. This principle emphasizes that a test must be efficient and realistic to administer in terms of affordability, ideal completion time, for example, 30 minutes to 2 hours, is ease of administration and efficiency in grading. For this reason, multiple choice tests are more practical for large groups of participants because they can be graded quickly, while SI tests are more suitable and manageable for small groups. Next is reliability. Consistency of result across test taker, raters intra and inter-rater, test administration, and test instrument. Reliability refers to the consistency, meaning a test must produce stable and comparable score even when administered at the different times or graded by different raters. This consistency is greatly influenced by the participants' optimal condition, the reliability of a single rater, intra-rater, the consistency of result across raters, inter-rater, the equivalence of testing conditions, and clarity of the test instrument itself, which must be free from ambiguity. Next is validity. The assessment truly measures what it is intended to measure, including content, criteria, constructs, consequence, and past validity. Validity refers to a test accuracy in measuring what it is intended to measure. A valid test must align with the taught material or content correspondent to the specific theory being assessed or construct, and be able to predict future ability and predictive, be fair to all participants, are consequential, and process a convincing outward appearance consistent with the claim skills or face. Next is authenticity. Natural language, contextual content, meaningful topic, and tasks that resemble real-life situations. An authentic assessment must measure how closely the tasks in the test resemble real-world language use. Authentic tests are characterized by natural language use, context-based question, and relevant, meaningful topics. For example, dictation composition tasks that successfully mimic real-world activities such as taking notes and summarizing information. And the last principle is washback, refers to the influence that tests have on teaching and learning. This influence can be positive or negative. Washback is the impact or influence that a test has on the teaching and learning process in the classroom. The impact can be positive if it improves the quality of teaching and motivates students to address their weaknesses through feedback, or negative if teachers focus solely on helping students pass in the test, like teaching to the test, while neglecting other language skills. Alright, that is the explanation regarding language learning assessment, and we can conclude that language learning assessment is an essential part of the teaching and learning process. Understanding the distinction between tests, measurement, assessment, and evaluations helps teachers design more purposeful assessment. Each of the 9 purposes of assessment serve a specific function, from selecting and placing students to measuring their final achievement. Assessment approaches have evolved from subjective SI translation method to performance-based and communicative approaches, reflecting the shift toward real-world language use. Finally, a good assessment must be practical, reliable, valid, authentic, and generate positive washback, ensuring that assessment not only measures learning but also supports and improves it. Okay, that's all from me. Thanks for watching, and wassalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh.